Yeah, thanks. Look, there's a lot of data out there, right? But when we talk about storytelling, we want to help people connect to the data. It's one thing to talk about, numbers of customers served, but it's a whole lot different when you try to make a number more than a number. How did that widget that you gave them, how did it impact them? So we have to show impact, and that means accessing the stories of communities and their individual members. It's a qualitative measure, which makes it sometimes hard to describe with just numbers. One of the things that it's always a struggle, especially in PR and communications, is we don't want to confuse output for outcomes. And the difference here, outputs are, how much money we invested or how many hours were volunteered. These are really easy to measure. But impact, the outcomes, that's so much harder to get at. And so because we don't necessarily have numbers always to help us really describe that, we turn to storytelling to show impact. So for example, we want to show the impact of a women's empowerment program. The number of women that we helped is great, but what I really want to do is go deeper and showcase maybe one woman or one community so that my audience understands how they were helped. Where are these women now because of the program? What more do they have? How have their households changed? This is what we use to humanize the data, which is really, at the end of the day, what I mean when I talk about ESG storytelling. And our goal with clients is to use these stories to build policymaker recognition of their social impact and help them develop relationships with key stakeholders. And this sort of goes back to my earlier point of, making friends before you need them. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to, maybe throw up on the screen an example here of one of those. So if you give me a second,
Perfect.
I will put up here a case study of something that we did for my client, the International Franchise Association. So if you look here, so IFA, they represent the franchise businesses. And this client was really eager to broaden its image and tell the story of diversity and inclusion as it relates to economic opportunity. So we worked with IFA to identify a pair of sisters, Michelle and Donna Lewis. They're two Black female franchise owners in Detroit, and they run an event space called Painting with a Twist. And what we did was help to tell the story of how they came to own this business and the impact that it had on downtown Detroit. This was an area that had been really economically devastated before entrepreneurs like the Lewis sisters began investing in their community. So to help tell their story and create a broader discussion around the needs of the business owners, we convened an event at their space and invited local leaders and elected officials. One in particular, Representative Dan Kildee of Flint, participated, and this was a really rich discussion that ultimately helped tell IFA's story about how franchise opportunities in minority communities really can help build up these communities and provide economic opportunities for folks who don't always have those opportunities. And ultimately really helped IFA build relationships with Democratic officials in a way that we hadn't been able to before, because we've been so focused previously on what it was they needed from a policy standpoint, and not really getting out there some of these good news stories. So this is an example that I wanted to share with you guys because it's one of my favorite clients, and they have so many stories like this that we really enjoy sharing on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you do the storytelling, say going back to the specific event, do you have in your own mind maybe the sense of what the stories are that certain kind of officials, public officials, elected officials have, and then you try to target, like if we could tell that story, we think it would resonate with that person, or isn't it so specific and targeted? It's a little broader.
Yeah, it depends. It really depends, I think, on the objectives of the work. So, in this case, We were really trying to help IFA build relationships with Democrats. A lot of their policy standpoints where it comes to wages and labor make a lot of sense for the business community, but they also tend to resonate more on the Republican side of the aisle. So to try to not only, look, we want to ultimately show folks on both sides of the aisle that their policy preferences and priorities make sense for America writ large, that they aren't necessarily partisan. But we were trying to, especially, I think, resonate across the aisle with Democrats and build some relationships there where maybe they weren't as strong before. And so in this case, you know, looking at a district that is traditionally Democratic, working with partners that had stories to tell that really resonated with some of the Democratic goals on the D side of the aisle. That was part of the objective there. But it depends. There are some clients who are trying to reach a very, very specific elected official who maybe is a very powerful chairman of a committee, or maybe it's with the COVID relief work that so many people are involved with right now. Maybe it has to do with reaching Jeff Zients over at the White House. So it depends, but it can be broad. It can also be very targeted.